"Don't stop," the young woman whispered to the millionaire that night, and that was the moment everything changed between them forever. What started as a game of interest turned into something no one expected. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happened after that night will move you. "Don't stop," she murmured in a trembling voice, her fingers gripping the delicate fabric of the wedding dress that still carried the scent of orange blossoms from the ceremony. The millionaire froze at those words, his grey eyes filling with a confusion she had never seen in this man, who was always so controlled. But Winifred wasn't asking what everyone would think. She was begging him not to stop telling the truth about the will that had changed both their lives forever. 3 months earlier, the 23-year-old woman worked 16 hours a day in a small bakery in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., where the smell of cinnamon and sugar mixed with the aroma of magnolias that perfumed the cobblestone streets. Her fingers were skilled with puff pastry, but her hands always trembled when she had to pay the late rent on the studio apartment where she lived with her bedridden grandmother. She was a young woman with a determined but gentle gaze, with a silent resilience that came from years of carrying the weight of responsibilities she hadn't chosen. The morning light filtered through the bakery windows, illuminating the flour that danced in the air like golden snow. Each croissant she shaped, each cookie she assembled with millimetric precision, was an act of faith, the faith that one day things would improve. Her most distinctive trait was her ability to find beauty in desperate situations. She decorated the simplest cakes with sugar flowers, so delicate they seemed to have been picked from the flowering gardens of Charleston. Regular customers adored her, not only for her creations, but for the smile she offered even on days when she had no strength for it. The millionaire Callahan Montgomery appeared one October afternoon, when golden leaves danced on the brick sidewalks of the historic district. He entered the bakery in an impeccable Tom Ford suit that contrasted with the modest white walls of the establishment, carrying a parchment paper envelope that seemed to have traversed decades. His hair with a few silver strands at the temples, and his straight posture revealed a man of 41, accustomed to commanding empires. But there was something broken in his gaze, a deep loneliness that all the money in the world hadn't been able to fill. His eyes scanned the modest interior of the bakery with unexpected melancholy, as if searching for something he'd lost long ago. "Miss Winifred Ashford." His voice was deep, cultivated, with an inflection that betrayed years of education at the finest East Coast institutions. She looked up from the raspberry tart she was glazing, surprised that a man like him knew her name. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" What followed seemed straight out of a surreal novel. Callahan Montgomery placed the envelope on the worn marble counter, between a tray of still warm croissants and a row of chocolate eclairs. The proposal seemed absurd. Immediate marriage in exchange for $3 million and all the medical care necessary for her grandmother. In return, she would have to remain married for exactly 1 year. "You're insane," was her first response, her cheeks flushed with indignation. "I'm not for sale." The document he showed her revealed the most bizarre clause of a will. He would receive the billionaire inheritance from his uncle Edward, who had distanced himself from the family only if he was married before turning 42, which would happen in just 90 days. The uncle apparently wanted to force his nephew out of his emotional ivory tower to build a life beyond business and money. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Callahan hesitated, his fingers drumming on the counter. "Because you resemble her, my younger sister. She left 20 years ago, and I never saw her again. When I saw you through the window, preparing those cakes with such care, something inside me broke and mended at the same time. Love often begins where logic ends." Winifred refused the first time without hesitation, almost before he finished his sentence. She made him leave the bakery with a firmness that surprised even Mrs. Henderson, the ever-stoic owner. "These rich men think everything can be bought," Winifred muttered, kneading the dough with unusual violence. Flour flew around her like a cloud of protest. "My integrity has no price." But Callahan Montgomery returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time with the same envelope, the same proposal, but also with something new, a growing respect for her refusal, a vulnerability he no longer hid. "I'm not asking for love," he said on the third day, standing in the autumn rain that drummed on the bakery's striped awning. His hair was soaked, his perfect suit ruined by water. "I'm asking for 1 year, 12 months of your life in exchange for saving your grandmothers. After that you'll be free, wealthy, able to achieve all your dreams." That night, Winifred didn't sleep. She sat beside her grandmother Beatrice's bed in the small 5th-floor studio, without an elevator, listening to the labored breathing of the woman who had raised her with stories of true love and dignity. On the nightstand, a pile of medical bills formed an insurmountable mountain. Numbers that seemed like cruel jokes, zeros that multiplied like accusations. Grandmother Beatrice was 87 years old. She had been a seamstress for the grand houses of Georgetown. She had raised Winifred alone after her parents left for London when the girl was only 7 years old, promising to return for their daughter as soon as they stabilized their situation. But years passed. Letters became sparse, then stopped completely. Beatrice had taught her to sew, to cook, to hold her head high even when the world seemed to collapse. "Dignity, my dear," she always said in her soft voice tinged with a southern accent, "is all that no one can take from us, unless we give it away." Winifred looked at her grandmother's wrinkled hands, those hands that had created magnificent dresses for wealthy women she would never meet, that had prepared simple but delicious meals with the little they had, that had dried the tears of an abandoned child and transformed pain into strength. Sometimes the greatest act of dignity is accepting help, even when it comes wrapped in a moral paradox. The following morning, when Callahan Montgomery returned, she knew by now he would always return. Winifred had red eyes but a firm voice. "I have conditions," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "First, my grandmother can never know this is an arrangement. She must believe it's a love marriage, or I won't accept. Second, you will never touch my personal savings. What I earn, I keep. And third," she hesitated, searching for the right words. "Third," he leaned slightly forward, attentive, "you will never disrespect me. Whatever the nature of this arrangement, I will not be treated as anything less than an equal." Callahan extended his hand, a sad smile touching his lips. "You have my word of honor, Miss Ashford. And I must add, you are already far more than my equal in courage and integrity." When their hands touched to seal the agreement, Winifred felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the dizzying sensation of jumping into the unknown, of betraying all her values to save just one, her love for the woman who had given her everything. The ceremony took place in a discreet courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, away from the bustle of D.C. It was a foggy November morning, where mist wrapped around the colonial architecture like a grey lace shroud. Winifred wore a simple ivory silk dress that Callahan insisted on buying from an elegant boutique on M Street. The saleswoman, a middle-aged woman with impeccably styled silver hair, had smiled nostalgically while adjusting the dress. "You're radiant, dear. Your fiancé is very fortunate." Winifred had simply nodded, unable to utter the lies already accumulating like stones in her stomach. In the austere marriage room, with only 2 witnesses Callahan had hired, an elderly notary with half-moon glasses and a secretary with tired eyes, the moment took on a surreal quality. The pale green walls of the courthouse seemed to close in on her. The smell of old papers and floor wax filled the air. The municipal officer, a balding man with graying moustache who had probably presided over hundreds of marriages, read the vows in a monotone voice that transformed sacred words into bureaucracy. When he arrived at the crucial question, his tired eyes lifted toward her. "Miss Winifred Grace Ashford, do you take Mr. Callahan Edward Montgomery here present to be your lawful wedded husband?" Her voice came out so low she had to repeat it, the word "I do" scratching her throat like broken glass. In that "I do," there were all the contradictions of her soul. Her love for her grandmother, the betrayal of her own principles, the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, she could keep her integrity intact in this transaction. Callahan didn't smile when placing the ring, a simple white gold band with a small diamond that caught the weak light filtering through the high windows. He simply nodded, with a solemnity that seemed to carry the weight of ancient regrets, his fingers trembling slightly as he slid the jewel onto her finger. "I promise," he murmured so quietly that only she could hear, "that you won't regret this." But how could she not regret having turned marriage into a business transaction? After the ceremony, they signed the papers in silence. The black ink on the official paper seemed to accuse Winifred, fraud, lie, betrayal. She imagined her grandmother discovering the truth, the disgust in her eyes, the disappointment of a lifetime of moral teachings reduced to nothing. "We should celebrate," Callahan said awkwardly as they stepped out into the thick fog. "Lunch, perhaps." "There's an excellent restaurant near the Potomac." "No." Winifred's voice was harsher than she intended. "I want to see my grandmother. That's why I did this. I want to make sure the money is already on its way to the hospital." A shadow of pain crossed Callahan's face, but he nodded. "Of course, I've already arranged the transfer. She'll start the new treatment tomorrow morning at Georgetown University Hospital. The best oncologists in the country will take care of her." They went together to the tiny Georgetown apartment. The familiar smell of lavender and old books greeted Winifred when she opened the door. Grandmother Beatrice was sitting in her armchair by the window, a crocheted blanket on her lap, watching the pigeons on the outside ledge. "Grandmother," Winifred called softly, her heart pounding. "I have someone for you to meet." When the old lady turned and saw Callahan Montgomery in his impeccable suit, holding her granddaughter's hand, her eyes lit up with joy so pure that Winifred felt tears sting her own. "My lord," Beatrice murmured, her wrinkled hand covering her mouth. "You got married today?" "It was quick," Winifred admitted, her voice strangled. "But yes, grandmother. This is my husband, Callahan." Callahan stepped forward, and to Winifred's surprise knelt before the old lady with grace that seemed natural rather than performative. "Mrs. Ashford, it's an honor to finally be part of your family. Winifred speaks of you with such love that I feel I already know you." Beatrice extended her trembling hand and caressed Callahan's face with maternal tenderness. "Take care of my little girl," she said simply. "That's all I ask. She has a heart that gives too much and protects itself too little." "I promise," Callahan replied, and in his voice there was something that resembled authentic sincerity. "The most dangerous lies are those that contain seeds of truth." The estate on the coast of Maine near Bar Harbor was a monument to New England elegance. Navy blue shutters framed arched windows overlooking the sparkling Atlantic. The exterior walls were painted a pale yellow that caught the sunlight and transformed it into liquid gold. Interior courtyards with fountain features offered oases of coolness, and the garden, the garden, was a paradise of climbing roses, purple wisteria draping the pergolas, and hydrangeas that perfumed the air with subtle sweetness. During the first 15 days of marriage, they lived as polite strangers under that same sumptuous roof. Winifred woke to the sound of Atlantic waves lapping the rocks below, the cry of seagulls circling above the turquoise water, the smell of coffee that Mrs. Peterson, the middle-aged housekeeper with perceptive eyes, prepared every morning at 7 o'clock sharp. Her room was decorated in shades of cream and navy blue, with antique furniture that had probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. The fine linen sheets were so soft against her skin, she felt guilty using them. From her bedroom window she could see the garden extending to a dramatic cliff that plunged into the sea. Callahan occupied the opposite wing of the house, a physical distance that reflected the emotional chasm between them. They crossed paths for meals, exchanging pleasantries that rang hollow in the high rooms. Breakfast was served in the bright sunroom with ocean views, lunch in the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier, and dinner, when they didn't find excuses to avoid it, on the terrace under the stars. "Is the coffee to your liking?" he would ask. "Yes, thank you," she would reply. "Is the house temperature comfortable for you?" "Perfectly. Do you need anything?" "No, nothing." Conversations that said nothing, touched nothing, maintained the necessary distance, so this arrangement remained exactly what it was, a business transaction. Winifred spent her days exploring Bar Harbor and the surrounding villages, Camden perched on its mountain like an eagle's nest, Rockport with its art galleries and stone streets, Portland with its old port stretching along Casco Bay. She discovered New England markets with their stalls of fresh lobster, blueberries, maple syrup so pure it seemed to have captured the essence of autumn itself. She took photos with an old camera she'd found in the estate's library, documenting this strange and sumptuous life she now inhabited like an intruder. She sent postcards to her grandmother, inventing stories of love and marital happiness that made her feel like a dishonest storyteller. Callahan, for his part, locked himself in his study, a room with walls lined with antique books, an imposing mahogany desk, and windows overlooking the sea. He worked long hours, participating in conference calls with London, New York, Tokyo. His deep voice sometimes penetrated the thick walls, speaking of millions, mergers, acquisitions, a business world that seemed as foreign to Winifred as the surface of Mars. But she noticed things. The way he stood on the balcony of his study at sunset, staring fixedly at the horizon, as if searching for something he would never find. The fact that he never touched the excellent wine, served at every dinner, drinking only mineral water with lemon. The photographs in his room, she'd glimpsed them one day when Mrs. Peterson was cleaning with the door open, of a young girl who vaguely resembled her, smiling at the camera with carefree joy. Mrs. Peterson, who had worked for the Montgomery family for 30 years, observed everything with her perceptive hazel eyes. "He was different once," she said one morning to Winifred, as they prepared apple tarts together in the bright kitchen with its white subway tiles. "Before Miss Violet's disappearance, he laughed, threw parties, lived. Now he merely exists." "What happened?" Winifred asked, kneading with concentration she didn't really have. The housekeeper sighed, her gaze lost out the window toward the sea. "A family dispute. The family wanted to marry Violet to a man she didn't love, a German industrialist twice her age. Mr. Callahan was supposed to protect her, but he gave in to family pressure. Violet ran away the night before the engagement. She was only 17, no one's seen her since. Mr. Callahan still blames himself 20 years later. The ghosts of the past weigh more than all the chains of the present. That evening, Winifred saw Callahan differently, no longer as the cold millionaire who had bought her, but as a man haunted by his own failures, perhaps seeking some form of redemption in this absurd marriage. She left an apple tart outside his study door, without a word. The next morning she found a note on her door. "Thank you. It was delicious." She would have loved it. C. It was the first thread of a connection beginning to weave something between them. Something fragile, dangerous, completely unexpected. It was the 16th day that the first real crack appeared in the carefully constructed facade of their arrangement. Winifred woke at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, tormented by confused dreams where her grandmother accused her of prostituting her integrity. She went down to the kitchen to prepare warm milk, a remedy Beatrice had taught her for insomnia. The terracotta tiles were cool under her bare feet. The house was immersed in an almost sacred silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant murmur of the sea. It was passing by the library that she saw light filtering under the massive oak door. She hesitated, her hand on the bronze handle, wondering if she should interrupt his solitude. But something, instinct, curiosity, or perhaps nascent compassion, pushed her to knock gently. "Come in," came the response, the voice thick and unusual. Callahan was sitting on the Persian rug of the library, leaning against a cognac leather sofa, a nearly empty bottle of bourbon beside him. It was the first time she'd seen him drunk, the first time the veneer of perfect control had completely cracked. His hair was disheveled, his shirt unbuttoned, and in his trembling hands he held a photograph yellowed by time. "I'm sorry," Winifred began, backing away. "I didn't mean to—" "No, stay," he said, his voice coming out too loud, then dropping to a whisper. "Please. I'm tired of being alone with my ghosts." She sat cautiously on the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough to see the photograph he held. A young girl with wavy brown hair, the same hair as Winifred's, laughing at the camera, her eyes bright with mischief and life. She wore a summer dress and stood in what seemed to be this same garden, but younger, wilder. "Violet," he said simply, caressing the edge of the photo with devotional care. "My younger sister. She was 16 in this photo, 1 year before everything collapsed." Winifred waited, sensing instinctively that this wasn't the moment to ask questions, only to listen. "You resemble her," Callahan continued, lifting his eyes to her with destabilizing intensity. "Not physically, not really, but in the way you move, the way you create beauty with your hands, the way you maintain your dignity even when the world asks you to abandon it." He poured the rest of the bourbon into his glass, his hands trembling slightly. "My father was a ruthless businessman. He saw people as chess pieces, tools to build the family empire. When an important German industrialist offered a business alliance in exchange for Violet's hand, my father accepted immediately. She was only 17. His voice broke. She came to me, begging me to help her. I was her older brother. the one who was supposed to protect her. And what did I do? I tried to convince her it was for the good of the family, that the man wasn't so bad, that she would learn to love him. The lies we tell ourselves to justify the inexcusable. Winifred felt her throat tighten. She thought of her own compromises, the way she had justified this transaction. She ran away the night before the official engagement, Callahan continued, emptying his glass in one gulp. She left a note saying she'd rather die free than live in a gilded cage. My father was furious, humiliated in front of his business partners. He blamed me. He said I'd spoiled Violet, that I'd been too weak with her. Maybe he was right. No, Winifred intervened softly but firmly. He was wrong. Love is never weakness. Callahan looked at her as if she'd just said something profoundly revolutionary. I spent 20 years searching for her, he admitted. Private detectives, contacts throughout Europe, a fortune spent. And 5 years ago, I finally found her. Charleston. She was working in a cafe in the historic district. Married, a child, a simple but apparently happy life. He stood suddenly, walking to the window overlooking the Black Sea, punctuated with lights from distant boats. I went to see her. I'd prepared a speech, apologies, explanations. But when she saw me, her eyes became so cold. She said, "You're dead to me from the day you chose their money over my happiness. Never come back." The silence that followed was heavy with ancient pain. Winifred stood and approached him, standing beside him at the window. The moon traced a silver path on the dark water. "That's why you chose me," she realized aloud. "Not just because I resemble her, but because it was your way of trying to correct the past, to save me where you couldn't save her." Callahan turned to her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "And look what I've done. I've turned your marriage into a transaction, exactly as my father did with her. I've become the man I hated." Without thinking, Winifred took his hand. "You saved my grandmother," she said simply, "and maybe, in this twisted way, you saved us both. Motivations can be complex without being evil." They remained like that, hand in hand, watching the sea under the moon. Two broken people seeking something that resembled redemption in the company of a stranger who had become less strange. Healing begins when we stop fleeing from our failures and start extracting wisdom from them. After that night of confessions, something changed subtly but irrevocably between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but a form of mutual understanding, a recognition that they were both navigating murky moral waters for reasons that went beyond simple greed. Winifred began leaving small sweets in the library, creations that mixed traditional American recipes her grandmother had taught her with modern techniques she studied in old baking books she'd discovered on the dusty shelves of the estate. Blueberry scones, light as clouds, pecan pie with a crust so flaky it shattered at the slightest touch, chocolate chip cookies that melted on the tongue, red velvet cupcakes whose aroma filled the entire house. Each creation was a silent invitation, a coded message that said, "You're not alone, I see you, I understand." Callahan responded in his own way. He ordered rare baking books she'd mentioned wanting to read, first editions of Julia Child and James Beard, worth a fortune. He outfitted part of the kitchen with professional equipment, a precision convection oven, a red KitchenAid mixer that quickly became her favorite tool, molds of every shape imported from New York. "You didn't need to do this," she said one morning, overwhelmed by such generosity. "I know," he replied simply, his grey eyes watching her with new intensity. "But I wanted to. You've transformed this house that was a mausoleum into something that feels like a home. The least I can do is give you the tools to continue." They began spending more time together, not by obligation, but by choice. Afternoons in the library discussing American literature. Callahan loved the classics, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck. Winifred preferred the poets Frost, Dickinson, Whitman. They debated their respective merits with a passion that surprised them both. "The Great Gatsby is the quintessence of the American dream," Callahan insisted, holding a leather-bound edition with worn pages. "The dream, perhaps," Winifred conceded with a mischievous smile, the first real smile she'd seen on his face. But for emotional depth, nothing surpasses Dickinson's poetry. It's a complete exploration of the human soul. "You're an idealist disguised as a pragmatist," he accused, laughing. "And you're a romantic disguised as a realist," she retorted. The evenings became precious moments, They dined on the terrace under a sky that shifted from pink to purple, then to deep blue dotted with stars. The sound of crickets filled the warm air, mixed with the scent of roses climbing the white trellises. They talked about everything and nothing: American politics, recent films, childhood memories. Winifred told of the time when she was 8 and tried to bake a surprise cake for her grandmother's birthday. She'd confused salt and sugar, creating something inedible. But Beatrice had pretended it was delicious, eating every bite with a brave smile. Callahan shared stories of his strict upbringing: stern tutors, summers spent studying business instead of playing, a father who saw affection as weakness. The first time Violet and I escaped supervision, he recounted with nostalgia. We were 12 and 7. We took the train to Boston without telling anyone. We spent the day at the harbor, eating ice cream and watching the boats. My father punished us for a month, but it remains one of my best memories. You really love your sister, Winifred observed softly. I do, he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. That's why her rejection still destroys me, because I deserve it. No one deserves to be isolated from those they love, Winifred said, surprising herself with the vehemence of her voice. Even when we make mistakes. Especially when we make mistakes. Forgiveness is not the erasure of the past, but the choice not to let the past erase the future. At the beginning of the second month, the bubble of tranquility in which they'd existed spectacularly burst. Callahan's family, greedy nephews, resentful cousins, and a particularly manipulative aunt, began arriving from Boston and New York like vultures sensing prey. The first to appear was Aunt Constance, a woman with hair dyed raven black and thin lips always pursed in disapproval. She arrived in a black Mercedes driven by a chauffeur, bringing luggage suggesting an extended, uninvited visit. Callahan, dear nephew, she declared, kissing the air beside his cheeks, never actually touching him. I heard the most extraordinary news. You got married, and no one was invited. How? Unusual. Her eyes settled on Winifred with the icy assessment of a jeweler examining a fake diamond. And so here's the new Mrs. Montgomery. How charming. The word charming was pronounced as one would say, vulgar. She immediately settled into one of the guest suites, transforming the estate into her personal territory. She criticized everything. The way Winifred dressed. Too simple, dear, you're a Montgomery now. The house decoration. These curtains really should be replaced. Even Winifred's baking. How quaint. Then came the cousins, Preston and Thaddeus, 2 men in their 30s who looked like bankers in too expensive suits, with smiles that never reached their eyes. They constantly talked business, Uncle Edward's inheritance, the astronomical sums the will mentioned. So, Callahan, Preston said during the first family dinner, cutting his beef Wellington with surgical precision, what a romantic you've become, marrying a baker after all these years of bachelorhood. It's almost poetic. The smile he offered was anything but friendly. Love finds us when we least expect it, Callahan replied calmly, taking Winifred's hand on the table. The gesture was meant to be part of the charade, but Winifred felt her pulse quicken at the contact. Really? Thaddeus intervened, pouring more wine into his glass. And when exactly did you meet? Because I find it strange that no one in the family ever heard of this relationship before the marriage announcement. Our personal story is ours alone, Winifred said, surprising everyone, herself included, with the firmness of her voice. We owe explanations to no one. Aunt Constance laughed, a dry, hard sound. Such pride. But dear, when you marry a Montgomery, you also marry the legacy, the responsibilities, and yes, the family's scrutiny. We have the right to ensure that, how shall I say, that the union is authentic. What are you insinuating? Callahan's voice was dangerously low. Insinuating? Constance delicately set down her fork. Nothing at all, dear. I'm simply stating facts. Sudden marriage, a few months before your 42nd birthday, just in time for Edward's will clause. Some people might find that convenient. Get out. Callahan stood, his chair scraping the floor with violent sound. Get out of my house, now. Callahan, calm down, Preston began. Aunt Constance didn't mean... She knew exactly what she meant. Callahan was now standing, imposing, his grey eyes blazing with cold fury. And I won't tolerate disrespect toward my wife under my own roof. The silence that followed was electric. Then, surprisingly, Aunt Constance smiled, a calculating smile that revealed what this whole scene really was, a test. "Good," she said simply. "I wanted to see if you'd defend her. It seems this union may have substance after all." But the test didn't stop there. During the following days, the family found constant excuses to observe, question, evaluate. They demanded the couple show affection in public, know intimate details about each other, behave like people truly in love. Thus Winifred and Callahan were forced to build a false intimacy that paradoxically began to reveal real truths. They learned to anticipate each other's gestures, hold hands naturally, share complicit glances that required no words. One evening, during a particularly tense dinner, Preston pushed too far. "So, Winifred," he said with a saccharine smile, "you must tell us. How did you manage to capture our Callahan? A special recipe? A spell?" The insinuation was clear. She was a gold digger, a manipulator who had trapped a wealthy man. Before Winifred could respond, Callahan struck the table so hard the glasses trembled. "Enough!" His voice filled the dining room, bouncing off the walls. "Winifred has more dignity in her little finger than all of you combined. She works 16 hours a day to support her sick grandmother. She creates beauty with her hands. She finds grace in impossible situations. If anyone here should feel fortunate, it's me. She agreed to marry a man haunted by his past, isolated by his fortune, incapable of expressing his emotions. So if you can't treat her with the respect she deserves, the door is there." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Aunt Constance seemed momentarily speechless. Later, in the darkness perfumed by roses in the garden, when everyone was asleep, Winifred found Callahan on the terrace, watching the moonlit sea. "You didn't need to do that," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, turning toward her, "because every word I said was true." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Winifred saw something that terrified and exhilarated her simultaneously. He was no longer playing a role. His feelings were real, and so were hers. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the prisons from which we must escape. The blow came in the form of a letter slipped under the front door on a rainy Tuesday morning. Winifred found it while coming down for breakfast, a white envelope without an address, sealed with red wax like in period novels. Inside, the message was brief and devastating. "I know your marriage is a financial arrangement. Edward Montgomery's inheritance is based on fraud. The estate executors will be informed unless certain accommodations are made. Await my instructions." Winifred's hands trembled as she read and reread the words. Someone knew. Someone was about to destroy everything for which she had sacrificed her integrity. Her grandmother would no longer receive treatment. The money would have to be returned, and worse, the truth would be revealed to Beatrice. She found Callahan in his study, already on a conference call with Tokyo. He saw her face and immediately hung up. "What happened?" She handed him the letter silently. She watched the color drain from his face as he read, his fingers gripping the paper so tightly it crumpled. "Damn it," he muttered, the first curse she'd heard him utter. "Damn, damn, damn." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back, like a caged lion. "This is my fault. I should have been more discreet. I should have anticipated someone would look for evidence." "What's done is done," Winifred said, trying to keep her voice steady, even as everything in her wanted to panic. "The question now is, what will we do?" Callahan stopped, looking at her with an intensity that made her step back. "We," he repeated softly. "You're still here. You're not taking the money you've already received and running." "Running where?" Winifred felt unexpected anger rising in her. "My grandmother is halfway through her treatment. If we stop now, she could—" Her voice broke. "No, we finish what we started. Together." Something passed through Callahan's eyes, relief, gratitude, and something else she didn't dare name. "All right," he finally said. "Together." They spent the following days investigating. Callahan hired a discreet private detective. They analyzed the letter's paper, high-quality parchment, the kind used for formal correspondence. The writing had been printed, so untraceable. The red wax suggested someone with a sense of the dramatic. It must be someone from the family, Winifred concluded one evening as they studied the clues in the library, documents scattered across the mahogany desk. Who else would have motivation? Who else would know about the will? "Everyone," Callahan replied bitterly. Aunt Constance wants to control the family fortune. Preston and Thaddeus want their share. Even distant cousins I'd never heard of have come out of the woodwork now that millions are at stake. It was Winifred who noticed the crucial detail. She was in Aunt Constance's study. The woman had invited her for tea, an invitation that was more a summons. On the elegant secretary desk, Winifred saw a stack of paper identical to the blackmail letter. She made an excuse to use the bathroom and discreetly took a paper sample, slipping it into her pocket. That evening, when she compared it to the blackmail letter, it was a perfect match. "It's her," Winifred said, showing the evidence to Callahan. "Your aunt." The confrontation took place the next day. They waited until the house was empty. Preston and Thaddeus had gone to Newport for business. Callahan asked his aunt to join them in the library. Constance entered with her usual arrogance, but her eyes betrayed nervousness when she saw their serious faces. "You've summoned me?" she said with forced laughter. "How dramatic." "The dramatic seems to be your specialty," Callahan replied, placing the blackmail letter and paper sample on the table before her. "Would you care to explain this?" Constance's face paled, but she recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't add lying to blackmail," Winifred said, her voice calm but implacable. "We have the evidence, the paper from your desk, and we checked with your secretary. You were the only person in the house the morning the letter was delivered." Constance looked at them. Then, surprisingly, she laughed, a bitter, resigned laugh. "Very well. Yes, it was me. And what will you do? Report me to the police? That would expose your own fraud." "Why?" Callahan leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Why, Constance? You have enough money. What did you really want?" The older woman slumped in the chair, suddenly looking all of her 65 years. "Control," she finally admitted. "I wanted control. Edward excluded me from his will because I supported your father in his decision about Violet. He called me sold to heartless ambition. Then he died and the entire fortune went to you, provided you married. I thought if I could prove the fraud, the money would go to other heirs, and I could maneuver for influence." She lifted eyes bright with bitter tears toward them. "But then I saw how you were together. During those dinners, those evenings, I saw something I never had in my own arranged marriage, a real connection, and I realized I'd become exactly what Edward accused me of being." The silence was heavy. Then Winifred did something that surprised everyone. She knelt before Constance and took her wrinkled hands. "You can change," she said softly. "It's never too late to become better than our worst actions. But you must leave, and you must never, ever repeat what you know." Constance looked at the young woman with something resembling wonder. "Why are you being so kind to me? I tried to destroy your life." "Because," Winifred replied, "revenge changes nothing. Forgiveness perhaps can change everything." Constance left the next day, but before doing so, she gave Callahan valuable information. Violet's current address in Charleston, updated. "She's ill," the old woman said softly. "Something with her kidneys. She needs a transplant. I thought you should know." After her departure, Callahan held Winifred for a long time, his face buried in her hair. "How do you do it?" he murmured. "How do you stay so good in such a cruel world?" "I'm not good," Winifred replied. "I'm just tired of cruelty, and I've chosen something else. True strength isn't in punishment, but in the ability to choose mercy when vengeance would be easier." The news about Violet haunted Callahan during the following weeks. Winifred saw him wake in the middle of the night, pacing the estate like a tormented soul. He'd found his sister, knew where she was, knew she was suffering, and he didn't dare contact her after her brutal rejection 5 years earlier. "She told me never to come back," he repeated during their nighttime conversations on the terrace. "What right do I have to force my presence when she was clear?" "She said that 5 years ago," Winifred reasoned. "People change. Circumstances change. What if she needs you now but is too proud to ask? What if she rejects me again?" The vulnerability in his voice broke something in Winifred's heart. "Then at least you'll have tried," she said softly, taking his hand. "At least she'll know you never stopped loving her, caring about her. That's all we can offer those we love. Our presence again and again, no matter how many times they push us away." It was finally Winifred who convinced him to go to Charleston. "We'll go together," she said. "If she rejects you, you won't be alone." They made the drive down the coast in Callahan's car. an elegant Aston Martin that devoured the miles between Maine and South Carolina. The ocean sparkled to their right, azure and infinite. Historic towns passed, Savannah with its Spanish moss, Beaufort with its antebellum mansions. In Charleston, they found the address in the French Quarter, a neighborhood of narrow cobblestone streets, pastel-colored houses with wrought-iron balconies, gardens overflowing with jasmine and azaleas. The apartment was on the third floor of a pale pink building. No elevator. Callahan stopped before the door, his hand raised to knock, frozen by indecision. "I'm here," Winifred murmured, standing close to him. "Whatever happens." He knocked. Shuffling steps approached. The door opened to a woman in her 40s, thin to the point of emaciation, with brown hair streaked with grey pulled back. She wore a worn bathrobe, and her eyes that had been vivid in the 20-year-old photograph, were now dulled by illness and pain. Violet immediately recognized her brother. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "I told you." "I know what you said," Callahan interrupted, his voice trembling. "And I respected that for 5 years. But I learned you're sick, Violet. And I can't stay away knowing you're suffering. Not again." "You have no rights here," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're right," Callahan admitted. "I have no rights. I lost that right 20 years ago. But I still love you, Vi. I've always loved you, and I want to help." "I don't want your dirty money," she spat, but she swayed, leaning against the doorframe. Winifred intervened then, introducing herself. "I'm Winifred, his wife. And we're not here to buy your forgiveness. We're here because that's what family does. It shows up even when it's difficult, even when it's not wanted." Violet looked at her, and something in her expression softened slightly. "You look like her," she murmured. "In the old photos. Why did you marry my brother?" The question was a test. Winifred felt it. "Out of necessity first," she answered honestly. "My grandmother was sick. He needed a wife for an inheritance. It was a transaction." Was, Winifred confirmed, looking at Callahan with tenderness she didn't try to hide. "Now it's become something else, something real." Violet studied their faces, then sighed, a sigh that seemed to come from the deepest part of herself. "Come in," she finally said, "but only for tea. And you haven't earned my forgiveness yet, Callahan." "I don't expect to earn it," he replied. "I just want to be present." The apartment was small but clean, tastefully decorated in shades of white and blue. Photographs covered one wall, Violet with a smiling man with kind eyes, a curly-haired boy, scenes of simple but happy life. "My husband, Marcus," Violet explained, noticing their gaze. "He's a teacher, and our son Oliver, he's 11. "You seem happy," Callahan said, his voice full of emotion he couldn't hide. "I am happy," Violet confirmed, pouring tea into mismatched cups. "Or I was before the illness. My kidneys, they're failing. I need a transplant, but the waiting list is long and the chances of finding a compatible donor." "I want to be tested," Callahan said immediately. "I might be compatible." "No." Violet shook her head firmly. "I don't want to be your redemption project." "It's not redemption," Callahan insisted, leaning forward. "It's love. It's what a brother does for his sister. Please, Violet." "Let me at least try." Violet's eyes filled with tears. "You abandoned me," she whispered. "When I needed you most, you chose their approval over my happiness." "I know," Callahan said, his own voice broken. "And I'll live with that mistake until my last day. But please don't punish me by refusing the help you need. Your family, Marcus, Oliver, they need you." It was an argument that finally touched Violet. She nodded slowly. "All right. You can be tested. But this doesn't fix anything between us." "I know," Callahan said. "But it's a start." They spent the afternoon together, sharing cautious stories. Violet told of her life in Charleston, how she'd met Marcus in a cafe where she worked, how they'd married in a small chapel with only a few friends, how Oliver was born and brightened their world. Callahan shared stories about his work, his life, and surprisingly, about his marriage to Winifred. "She saved me," he admitted simply. "From myself, from my loneliness, from becoming completely lost." When they finally left, as the sun set over Charleston Harbor, Violet awkwardly kissed her brother on the cheek. "Call me with the test results," she said softly. "And Callahan? Thank you for coming." In the car on the way back, Callahan cried. From relief, gratitude, released pain. Winifred drove, one hand on his thigh, letting him release 20 years of guilt and grief. Family healing doesn't come from one grand gesture, but from the accumulation of small moments of courage and vulnerability. The tests showed Callahan was compatible with Violet, a statistical miracle that seemed almost divine intervention. The surgery was scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving both time to prepare physically and emotionally. But just when everything seemed finally aligned, fate struck again. A call from Georgetown University Hospital came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Grandmother Beatrice had suffered a serious relapse. Winifred received the news while preparing croissants in the kitchen, her hands covered in butter and flour. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, crashing onto the tile floor. The world seemed to tilt, everything becoming blurred and distant. Callahan found her collapsed on the kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The phone beside her still broadcasting the doctor's voice. He immediately knelt, taking her in his arms, rocking her like one rocks an injured child. "She's going to die," Winifred sobbed against his chest. "After everything, all the sacrifices, all the compromises, all the lies, she'll die anyway." "No," Callahan said firmly, though he had no guarantees to offer. "No." The doctor said it's serious but not hopeless. "She's strong, Winifred. She's survived 87 years of life. She's not going to give up now." But the certainty Winifred had always maintained, that everything she'd done was worth it to save her grandmother, began to crumble. In the hospital, watching Beatrice connected to machines that beeped and breathed for her, Winifred confronted the terrible truth. Sometimes, despite all our efforts, we cannot save those we love. "I lied to her," Winifred murmured that evening, sitting beside the hospital bed holding her grandmother's cold hand. About the marriage, about Callahan, about everything. And now she might leave thinking I found happiness, when it was all a farce. Callahan, who had stayed with her for 48 hours straight, cancelling important meetings in New York, neglecting multi-million-dollar deals, took her other hand. "It's not a farce anymore," he said softly. "Not for me." "Is it still a farce for you?" Winifred lifted red eyes to him. "I don't know what it is anymore," she admitted. "I'm afraid of my own feelings. I'm afraid that if they turn out to be real, it means I betrayed my principles even more deeply. And I'm afraid that if they're not real, then I sold my soul for nothing." "Your feelings don't betray anyone," Callahan insisted. "Falling in love isn't a transaction. It's the most authentic part of everything we've experienced." But Winifred couldn't hear him. She was lost in a labyrinth of guilt and fear, unable to see an exit. During the following days, while Beatrice remained in critical but stable condition, Winifred withdrew into herself. She stopped baking. The creations that had been her language of love became impossible when her heart was so heavy. She stopped talking, responding to Callahan in monosyllables. She stopped believing things could improve. It was Beatrice herself who finally brought her back. The old lady woke one evening while Winifred dozed in an uncomfortable chair beside the bed. Her voice was weak but clear. "Dear, stop punishing yourself." Winifred sat up suddenly. "Grandmother, you're awake." "Yes, and I've heard enough of your self-accusations during my sleep to last a lifetime," Beatrice said, with a hint of her usual humor. "Do you think I don't know this marriage started as an arrangement?" The blood drained from Winifred's face. "You knew?" "Dear, I'm old, not stupid," Beatrice said, weakly pressing her hand. "Sudden marriage, sudden improvement in our finances, sudden availability of the best treatments. Coincidences of that magnitude don't exist. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I saw something you didn't see," the old lady replied. "I saw a man fall in love with you. I saw a woman fighting against her own feelings out of misplaced pride. And I saw two people who deserved happiness, but were too afraid to grasp it." Tears now flowed freely down Winifred's cheeks. "I sold marriage, grandmother. The most sacred thing." "No," Beatrice gently corrected. "You saved my life at the cost of your pride. That's the greatest act of love I've ever seen. And now you have the chance to transform something that started out of necessity into something beautiful. Don't waste this chance because of misdirected guilt." "What if I don't deserve it?" Winifred whispered. The happiness, the love, all of it. "Oh, my child," Beatrice said, caressing her face with infinite tenderness. "No one deserves love. It's a gift, not a reward. And the only way to honor it is to accept it with gratitude and return it. Self-forgiveness is often the most difficult, but also the most necessary to move forward." Grandmother Beatrice finally came home, no longer to the tiny Georgetown apartment, but to a comfortable house with a New England garden that Callahan had discreetly purchased in Lexington, Massachusetts. The house had white shutters, a garden full of antique roses and hydrangeas, and a view of rolling hills covered with maple trees and stone walls. The day of her arrival, Beatrice summoned Winifred and Callahan to the small living room with exposed beams. The smell of freshly cut roses filled the air, mixed with the scent of lindens in the garden. "Sit down," she ordered, with all the authority of someone who had raised a child alone for 16 years. "We need to have a serious conversation." They sat side by side on the white linen sofa, like schoolchildren awaiting a reprimand. "Stop pretending you're pretending," Beatrice said without preamble, her lively eyes moving between them. "True love is frightening, my children, because it makes us vulnerable. But it's the only thing worth anything in this life." "Grandmother," Winifred began. "Let me finish," the old lady interrupted. "I've lived 87 years. I knew great love with your grandfather, William. Peace be upon him. I've also known widowhood, loneliness, sacrifice, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, what you've found together, no matter how it started, is rare and precious. Don't waste it out of pride or fear." She turned to Callahan. "And you, young man, stop punishing yourself for your past mistakes. Your sister has forgiven you. I see it in how she talks about you now. It's time you forgave yourself." Then to Winifred, "And you, dear, stop believing you need to redeem something. You saved my life. You gave this man something no amount of money could buy, the ability to feel again. You saved each other. That's what true love does." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Then Callahan spoke, his voice hoarse. "Mrs. Ashford, may I have your permission to court your granddaughter properly? Not as part of a contract, but as a man who has fallen desperately, irremediably in love?" Beatrice smiled, her eyes shining. "Granted, on the condition that you take her to the Tanglewood Music Festival next month, and that you learn to make proper apple pie. Yours is always too soggy." They all burst into laughter, a liberating laugh that broke the tension and opened the door to something new. That night, back in Bar Harbor, Winifred and Callahan remained long on the terrace, watching the stars shimmering above the Atlantic. The roses perfumed the warm air, and somewhere in the garden, a mockingbird sang. "Are you sure?" Callahan asked softly. "About wanting to continue this? About giving me a real chance? Because I must warn you, I'm an emotional disaster. I've spent 20 years avoiding my feelings. I don't know how to do this properly." Winifred turned to him, taking his face in her hands. "No one knows how to do this properly," she said. "That's the beauty of love. There's no instruction manual. We learn by living, making mistakes, forgiving each other." "I'm afraid," he admitted, his vulnerability touching her deeply. "I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid of ruining everything, like I ruined things with Violet." "You won't lose me," Winifred promised. "And even if you make mistakes, and you will, we both will, we'll face them together." Then she kissed him, not as a performance for family, not as part of a charade, but as a woman in love, kissing the man who had awakened her heart against all odds. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, then deepened into something more urgent. All the weeks of contained tension, denied feelings, repressed desire poured into that moment. When they finally separated, both breathless, Callahan laughed, a sound of pure joy she'd never heard from him. "What?" she asked, smiling. "I'm just realizing," he said, pulling her into his arms, "that for the first time in my life, I'm not living in the past or the future. I'm here now with you, and it's perfect." True love doesn't begin with a grand romantic gesture, but with the daily choice to show one's vulnerability and welcome that of the other. Violet's surgery took place at the beginning of the 5th month of their marriage. The operation was risky. Donating a kidney was no trivial act, and complications could be serious. But Callahan never hesitated. "It's what a brother does," he simply repeated when Winifred expressed her concerns the evening before the surgery. The whole family was there, Marcus, Violet's husband, a man with kind eyes and warm smile. Oliver, their 11-year-old son, who looked so much like young Callahan it was unsettling. And even Beatrice, who had insisted on making the trip despite her fragile health. The operation lasted 7 hours. Winifred spent every minute in the waiting room, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, negotiating with fate, promising anything if only Callahan could return safe and sound. When the surgeon finally emerged, removing his mask with a tired smile, Winifred felt her knees give way. "The operation was a success," he announced. "Both patients are in recovery. Mr. Montgomery should recover fully, and Ms. Gray is accepting the new kidney well." Tears of relief flowed freely. Marcus embraced Winifred. Oliver cried against his grandmother Beatrice's shoulder, and in that moment they weren't strangers but a family, bound by love and sacrifice. The recovery days were long. Callahan suffered considerably, more than he admitted. Winifred knew from the way his jaw clenched. But every time she suggested more painkillers, he refused. "The pain reminds me I'm alive," he'd say, "that I finally did something right." Violet recovered in the adjacent room. On the third day, when both were strong enough, Winifred arranged a meeting. She wheeled Callahan's wheelchair into his sister's room. Violet was sitting up, pale but with more color than Winifred had ever seen. Her eyes filled with tears when her brother entered. "Idiot," she said, her voice trembling. "Stupid, noble idiot. You could have died." "But I didn't," Callahan replied, reaching his hand toward her. "And neither did you. And that's all that matters." Violet took his hand, squeezing it tight. "I forgive you," she whispered, "for everything. I forgave you years ago, but I was too angry and stubborn to admit it." "I'm sorry." "I'm the one who's sorry," Callahan insisted, tears now flowing down his cheeks. "I should have defended you. I should have been the brother you deserved." "You are now," Violet said simply. "That's what matters." Winifred left them alone to talk, cry, begin the long process of rebuilding 20 years of separation. She found Marcus in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk. "Thank you," he said when she sat beside him, "for pushing him to come, for being there for him. He needed someone like you. It's easy to be there for someone when you love them," Winifred replied softly. Marcus looked at her, a knowing smile on his face. "Violet told me your marriage started as an arrangement. But no one looks at someone the way you look at him unless it's become much more." "It's become everything," Winifred admitted, "and that terrifies me sometimes." "Love should terrify," Marcus said wisely. "That's how you know it's real. Reconciliation doesn't erase the past, but it strips it of its power over the present." In the 6th month, when both Callahan and Violet were fully recovered, Winifred and Callahan made a decision. They would renew their vows. Not for family, not for the inheritance, but for themselves. The ceremony took place in the small chapel of Trinity Church in Newport, Rhode Island, perched dramatically on cliffs above the Atlantic. It was a June morning, where the sky was such a pure blue it seemed unreal, and the air carried the scent of beach roses and salt spray. The chapel was simple and historic, with white clapboard walls and stained glass windows that cast patterns of colored light on the floor. Grandmother Beatrice was in the front row, radiant in a lavender dress, crying tears of joy. Beside her, Violet held Marcus's hand, Oliver sitting politely between them. Winifred wore the lace veil Beatrice had worn at her own wedding 60 years earlier, carefully restored, every stitch loaded with history and love. Her dress was simple, in cream silk with delicate embroidery of roses, created by a local seamstress who had captured exactly what Winifred wanted, something between tradition and newness. Callahan waited for her at the altar, dressed in a navy blue suit, a white rose at his boutonniere. When their eyes met as she walked toward him on Beatrice's arm, Winifred saw everything they'd experienced together, reflected in his gaze. The cold transaction at the beginning, the slow crumbling of mistrust, the nighttime revelations, the family defenses, her grandmother's relapse, the transplant, every moment that had led them here. The minister, an old man with gentle eyes who had agreed to bless this renewal, even knowing the unusual story, began the ceremony with simple words. "We are here today not to begin a marriage, but to recognize and celebrate what has already bloomed." When it came time for personal vows, Callahan spoke first, his voice clear but moved. "Winifred, when I met you, I lived in a prison of my own creation, isolated by wealth, haunted by the past, unable to imagine a different future. You saved me not by accepting my proposal, but by teaching me day after day what it truly means to live. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that forgiveness isn't defeat, that love isn't a transaction, but a gift we choose to give daily. I promise to choose every day to love you, support you, grow with you. I promise to no longer live in the past, but to build a future with you. I promise to be worthy of the faith you've placed in me. Winifred wiped her tears, then spoke, her own voice trembling with emotion. Callahan, I started this journey terrified I would lose my integrity, sell what was sacred. But you taught me that integrity isn't rigidity. It's being true to our core values even when circumstances change. You taught me that love can be born from the most improbable beginnings, that it can transform the impossible into the miraculous. I promise to see you, truly see you every day, not as a millionaire or businessman, but as Callahan, the man who cries listening to Gershwin, who stays awake all night worrying about his sister, who donated a kidney without hesitation. I promise to build with you not a perfect life, but an authentic one full of beauty created together. They exchanged new rings, not the simple gold of the first marriage, but intricate bands where intertwined vines symbolized their intertwining lives. When the minister declared them husband and wife, in heart as in law, they kissed under the moved applause of the few people who truly mattered. The reception was held in the garden of the Bar Harbor estate, transformed into a paradise of roses, white hydrangeas, and blue delphiniums. Tables set under pergolas draped with climbing roses, gentle music played by a local string quartet, and food celebrating New England tradition, fresh lobster rolls, clam chowder, blueberry pie, local craft beer. But the highlight was dessert. Winifred had spent weeks perfecting a creation, a towering Boston cream pie, layers upon layers of sponge cake and vanilla custard, the whole covered in chocolate ganache and decorated with edible flowers. It was both traditional and innovative, exactly like their love. When they cut the first piece together, applauded by their guests, Callahan murmured, "You've transformed my life like you transformed these simple ingredients, with care, creativity, and love." "We transformed each other," Winifred gently corrected. They danced until sunset, which painted the sky spectacular shades of pink, orange, and purple, reflected in the calm waters of the Atlantic. Beatrice danced with Oliver, Violet with Marcus, and for a moment everything was exactly as it should be. That evening, when all the guests had left and the estate was immersed in tranquil silence, Winifred and Callahan remained on the terrace, their hands intertwined. "Do you remember when you told me don't stop that first night?" Callahan murmured. "Yes," Winifred replied. "I thought you were asking me to continue with the plan, not to reveal the truth about the will. And now I know you were asking me not to stop being true, not to stop feeling, not to stop becoming the person I could be." Winifred smiled, touching his face with infinite tenderness. "You understood. Finally. True marriage isn't a ceremony, but a daily choice to stay, to grow, to love despite everything, and because of everything." 1 year after their first marriage, or rather 13 months, because they'd surpassed the original contract without even noticing, Winifred discovered she was expecting a baby. She took the test one September morning, as the New England summer slowly gave way to the crisp autumn of the coast. Her hands trembled, seeing the 2 bright pink lines appear. She sat on the edge of the marble bathtub, overwhelmed by a cascade of emotions: joy, terror, wonder, panic. A baby, a human being created from their improbable love. She found Callahan in the garden, pruning the rose bushes with concentration he now applied to all kinds of practical tasks he would never have considered before meeting her. He'd learned to garden, to cook simple dishes, to live instead of merely existing. "We need to talk," she said, and something in her voice made him immediately drop the pruning shears. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine," she replied, taking his hands in hers. "Callahan, I'm pregnant." The expression that crossed his face was extraordinary. First total surprise, then something resembling terror. Then, finally, a joy so pure and complete it illuminated his entire face. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly anxious. "We never really discussed children. If it's not the right time—" He interrupted her by lifting her and spinning her around, laughing with uncontained joy. "The right time? Winifred, every moment with you is the right time. A baby? Our baby? It's a miracle." Then, more seriously, he gently set her down. "But I'm also afraid," he admitted. "I'm afraid of being a bad father. Look at the example I had." "You won't be your father," Winifred said firmly. "You've already proven you can change, that you can love unconditionally. You donated a kidney to your sister, Callahan. You learned to make proper apple pie for my grandmother. You're already the man this child will need." Uncle Edward's inheritance arrived officially a few weeks later, millions of dollars, properties throughout the United States, shares in various companies. But it seemed almost incidental now, a footnote in the larger story they had written. They used much of the money to create the Montgomery Ashford Foundation, dedicated to helping vulnerable families throughout America. They funded medical treatments, educational programs, emergency housing, all designed so other young people wouldn't have to make impossible choices between love and survival. The Georgetown bakery where Winifred had worked was purchased and transformed into a free baking school for at-risk individuals, particularly young women. Winifred taught 2 days a week herself, sharing not only techniques but her story, proving it was possible to transform adversity into opportunity. Grandmother Beatrice settled permanently in the Lexington house, where she spent her days gardening, telling stories to Oliver, who often visited with Violet and Marcus, and knitting what would become an impressive collection of clothes for her great-grandchild to come. Violet and Callahan rebuilt their relationship slowly, patiently. They couldn't erase 20 years of separation, but they created new memories: Sunday family dinners, vacations together in Cape Cod and the Berkshires, daily phone calls that replaced painful silence. In Winifred's 6th month of pregnancy, they threw a party in the estate garden, not to celebrate anything specific, but simply to gather all the people who had been part of their transformation. Under lanterns hanging from trees, with the Atlantic sparkling in the distance and the scent of roses filling the warm spring air, Winifred stood to make a toast. Her pregnancy made her radiant, her hair thicker and shinier, her cheeks rosy with health. "1.5 years ago," she began, her hand resting on her rounded belly, "I made a choice I thought betrayed everything I believed in. I turned marriage into a transaction. I lied to the person I loved most in the world. I compromised my principles out of desperation." She looked around at the circle of faces, Beatrice with her eyes full of pride, Violet holding her brother's hand, Marcus and Oliver smiling, Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who had become family. "But I learned that sometimes the most imperfect beginnings can lead to the most perfect destinations. That integrity isn't rigidity, but staying true to what truly matters: love, family, compassion. That mistakes don't define us. What we do with them defines us." Her voice became more emotional. "I thought I was selling my integrity for money, but I discovered something far more precious, that love cannot be bought, but it can be earned through vulnerability, patience, and the daily choice to see the best in each other." Callahan stood to join her, his arm around her waist. "And I learned," he added, his voice carrying in the quiet garden, "that it's never too late to change. That the ghosts of the past only have the power we give them. That true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in these moments, these perfect evenings with the people we love, these quiet mornings with the woman who saved us, these futures we build together." He gently kissed Winifred's forehead, then raised his glass. "To improbable love, to rebuilt family, to the unwritten future." "To the unwritten future," everyone echoed, glasses clinking under the stars. 3 months later, on a gentle June night, while the full moon reflected on the calm Atlantic waters and the garden exploded in white roses, Winifred gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Grace Violet Montgomery, Grace for the elegance of second chances, Violet for the sister found again and the reconciliation that had healed a broken family. When Callahan held his daughter for the first time, his large hands trembling as he supported the tiny being wrapped in pink, tears flowed freely down his cheeks. "I promise," he murmured to little Grace, "to always defend you, to always see who you truly are, not who I want you to be, to love you unconditionally, To be the father I didn't have, but the one your mother taught me to be. Winifred, exhausted but radiant, watched the man who had been a cold stranger become her life partner, holding their daughter with tenderness that made her fall in love with him again, even more deeply. "Do you remember," she said softly, "when I told you don't stop? How could I forget? I want to say it again now, but differently." She reached out, touching his face. "Don't stop being this man, vulnerable, loving, present. Don't stop growing, don't stop believing we deserve this happiness." Callahan kissed her palm, then her hand, then her lips in a gentle kiss that tasted of tears of joy and exhaustion. "I'll never stop," he promised, "because you taught me that the true journey never ends. It simply transforms, deepens, becomes more beautiful." And every evening thereafter, when the sun set over the Atlantic and painted the sky impossible shades of orange and purple that reflected on the estate's weathered shingles, they sat in the garden perfumed by roses. Callahan read poetry aloud, Frost, Dickinson, Whitman. Winifred created new recipes in her leather-bound journal, documenting flavors she wanted to recreate. And between them, in a cradle woven of New England willow, Grace slept, dreaming of futures not yet imagined. Beatrice came often, sitting in her favorite wicker chair, knitting and telling stories of old America. Violet, Marcus, and Oliver visited every Sunday, filling the house with laughter and life. The foundation they'd created grew, touching thousands of lives across the country. What had begun as a cold transaction, a marriage of convenience, a financial arrangement, an absurd proposal in a Georgetown bakery, had transformed into something no contract could ever capture. A love built on the strongest possible foundation. Not the blind passion of youth, nor the superficial attraction of physical beauty, nor the comfortable security of familiarity, but the daily choice to stay, to grow, to love despite imperfections, because of imperfections. To build something beautiful from imperfect beginnings. To believe that even in our darkest moments, when we make choices that seem to betray our values, we can find our way to the light, not by erasing our mistakes, but by transforming them into wisdom. The Garden of Possibilities, as Winifred now called it, flourished under their care. Antique roses climbed white trellises, lavender swayed in the ocean breeze. Blueberry bushes produced fruit so sweet they seemed to have captured the essence of summer itself, and at the center, a new rose bush they'd planted together on their true wedding day grew strong and verdant, its white blooms opening each evening to perfume the night with promises kept and futures embraced. True love doesn't begin with a lightning strike, but with the deliberate and repeated choice to see the other's humanity, honor their vulnerability, and build together something greater than the sum of our two broken stories, something that resembles hope, tastes like redemption, and blooms like roses under New England stars, eternal, fragrant, and miraculous in its improbability.